Hello, boys and girls. I am so happy to hear that you're going to be reading my book, Little House in the Big Woods. Well, my name is Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I wrote that book especially for children like you so that you could know what my life was like a long time ago, living in the prairie. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and my life. I was born on February 7th, 1867, in a little log cabin in the sparsely populated woods of Wisconsin. I have an older sister, and her name is Mary. We get along really well and have lots of fun together. I also have two little sisters named Carrie and Grace. I did have a little brother whose name was Charles Jr., but a really sad thing happened and he died when he was only 9 months old. Life on the prairie can be really hard sometimes, but one thing that always cheers my family up is my pa. His name is Charles. He is always joyful, always jolly, and sometimes even a little bit reckless. Well, he plays his fiddle and he sings songs, and we just love how my pa makes everything so full of fun. He also has some other jobs that he does to take care of our family. He farms our land. He shoots wild game or wild animals that he finds around with bullets, but he actually makes the bullets himself. He also fishes and he traps animals for their skins. See, we depend on the environment around us to meet all of our needs. My ma's name is Carolyn. She is graceful and gentle and peaceful and educated. She has different jobs than my pa, but they are just as important. She was in charge of cleaning the house. She made all of our clothes and bonnets, and she also helps plant and take care of the garden. My sisters and I help our family with chores around the house. We do all kinds of things. One example is we help milk the cows. Then we take the milk that we get from the cows and we churn it to make butter and cheese. And then my family has those things to eat. We also help plant the garden. We help butcher the hogs and smoke the meat. And we help make soft leather out of the deer skins that my pa hunts. We also make sugar from maple syrup and gather wild honey. Well, I wrote my book, Little House in the Big Woods, to tell children like you about the long ago way of life I knew in my childhood. My book is historical fiction. Now, all of the characters in my book and a lot of the events and memories are true, but some of it I made up just to make the story a little bit better and more interesting and fun. But most of the stories are based on my real memories from my childhood growing up in the woods. I wanted to give children like you a lot of details of my life, from raising and preserving food to the fun sugaring off dance we had at Grandpa's house, to my family's happy, simple Christmas celebration. My mom and dad worked very hard for our family's survival. Well, my family moved around quite a bit through my childhood. When I was 2 years old, we moved from Wisconsin to an Indian reserve in Kansas. That was pretty exciting because I got to meet Indians and I even saw a cattle drive across the open plains. That was pretty exciting. But then we moved back to Wisconsin and we lived there a little while before we moved to Walnut Grove, Minnesota. While we were on our way to Minnesota, I saw my very first train. That was very exciting. My family experienced some hard times in Minnesota, though. For 2 years in a row, We had a plague of locusts, which are little pests, and they came and they ate almost all of our crops. So, to make ends meet, Pa moved us to Burr Oak, Iowa, and it was there that we helped run a hotel. After a little while, we moved back to Walnut Grove, Minnesota. And then, when I was 12 years old, we moved to DeSmet, South Dakota. Just before we moved, something terrible happened. My sister Mary got very sick. She was so sick that she had a really high fever, and that caused her to go blind. So I took the responsibility of taking care of my sister Mary and acting as her eyes so that she could get around and do things. Now, even though we moved around a lot, everywhere we went, my parents made sure that we went to church and that we were enrolled in school. You know, my mom used to be a school teacher, so education was really important to her. She always had something around the house for us to read, but we mostly read from the Bible. Now, I loved school. I was the best student in the whole class. So I became a teacher in a nearby town when I was just 16 years old. And then I met this handsome man named Almanzo. We got married when I was just 18 years old. We were married 1 year when I had my baby daughter named Rose. But I hate to tell you, our life was not easy. First, hail destroyed our whole wheat crop. And then our barn burned down with all of the grain stored inside. Almanzo and I caught this illness called diphtheria, and it's a very serious infection. It was so serious that it left Almanzo partially paralyzed. He had to walk with a cane the rest of his whole life until he died. We lost 2 wheat crops to drought, and our 2-week-old baby died. Our house burned down with all of our things inside. We lived in Minnesota and Florida, but eventually we made our way back to DeSmet, South Dakota, where I worked as a dressmaker and Almanzo worked as a carpenter. Eventually, we moved to Rocky Ridge Farm in Mansfield, Missouri, and we became apple farmers. We planted about 400 apple trees, and we kind of became famous in the area for our farming skills. We were so good at it that the local newspaper asked me to write some articles. So I discovered that I really enjoyed writing. I enjoyed it so much that my daughter Rose convinced me to write an autobiography, which is a story about my life. But unfortunately, nobody was very much interested in publishing my autobiography. But one person suggested that I took all those details about my life and turned it into a fun book for children to read. And that is what I did. And that is where this book that you're about to read, Little House in the Big Woods, comes from. And if you enjoyed this book, you can read the other books that I wrote about my life on the prairie when I was a little bit older. Now, do you know that you can be a writer just like me? You can be a writer too. Sometimes the easiest thing to write about is something that actually happened to you, like a memory. So think of a memory that would make a good story. And then you're going to take that memory and write a story about it and draw a picture. I can't wait for you to read my book and see what you think about life long ago in the big woods.